On Wednesday nights, we have a Bible study that gets together to encourage and sharpen each other, and it is a study for men and for young men because we feel like we live in a world that wants to beat men up, and we want to be a place where we can build men up so that they can be a blessing to others. Well, the name of that group is, somebody say it out loud. It's the Band of Brothers, and I'm not real clever, I'm not real creative. I didn't make up that name, but I stole it from a mini-series from a movie that probably a lot of you have seen. And it's a mini-series that takes this one group of young men, this company, all the way from boot camp, all the way through many battles of World War II and right up to the very end where they're marching into Germany or into Berlin. And so a lot of the things in the movie are based on real events. They kind of brought them all together as if this one group of men experienced them all, but it's a way of telling the story. And I was really impacted by that, and so that's why we chose that name. Well, there is this one particular scene of that movie that means really a lot to me, and it is, of course, based on an actual event. As these Allied soldiers entered into the town of Landsberg, they noticed that all of the military-age men were gone. They were off, not really fighting the war, but running at that point. And so they come into this town, they begin to occupy homes and set up a place for them to rest and recuperate until they got their orders about what was going to come next. It was very peaceful and it was very quiet, and they were really enjoying themselves. But as they were settling in, they discovered something just through some woods just on the outskirts of town, and it was a concentration camp that had been abandoned, not abandoned by the prisoners, but abandoned by all of the guards and all of the people that were working there, stationed there. Only the prisoners were left. Couldn't tell how long they had been alone, but they had been so mistreated and so malnourished that they immediately began to open the gates and to let these guys out. And they were just, I mean, you know the history, you've seen the pictures. They were walking skeletons, many of them just too weak to even move. They were so malnourished, the Allied soldiers began to give them whatever food they had on them. You know, here's an MRE, here's some bread, here's some cheese, whatever they had. And a doctor stopped them. He said, you can't do that, because their body has been without nourishment for so long that it can't process the food, and that's too much, and it'll kill them. And so they actually had to go back and take the food away from them. They actually had to close the gates so that they couldn't just run free until they received medical care so that they could really be taken care of. Well, one of the things that the Allied soldiers did, and I did a little research, and this really happened, is that the Allied soldiers went back to that little town where the civilians were just living all happy and ignoring what was happening just on the other side of those trees. And they forced the civilians in the town to come and to participate in the care of these mistreated people and in the burying of the dead. They had been neglecting to pay attention to the pain that was happening so close by for too long, but now they would see it up close, and now they were unable to deny the truth. And the scene continues with civilians from the town doing what they were doing, and the American soldiers beginning to leave that area because they had their orders. And you could see those that had been rescued, I want to use the word celebrate, but they had so little energy. It was almost just as if you could see it in their eyes, the gratitude and the celebration for what had happened. Their war was over, and the evil had been driven away from them. I want to ask you this morning, is it okay to cheer for the downfall of your tormentors? Is it okay? I mean, don't you feel a little bit guilty about it? It's like, okay, so here's someone that has done evil, that has hurt you so bad, hurt your family, hurt your nation, and then when they are vanquished, when they are killed, when they are no longer able to do anything, you want to just say, yes, that's so awesome. Should you feel guilty about that? Is it okay to cheer for the downfall of your tormentor? Is it? Yeah, I feel a little tension in the room. I don't know. Well, let's walk through this together. The celebration is because, and this is very important, It's because they will never hurt you again. And this serves as a very dramatic picture of God's rescuing of us. And we see that in the book of Nahum. And so if you want to open your journal up, we're going to be looking at the book of Nahum, and we'll kind of scan through those 3 chapters. So if you're a note taker, you can begin taking notes right there at the beginning of the book. But it serves as this picture of God's rescuing of us because we are doomed, because we are helpless, and at just the right time, Jesus Christ came to seek and to save the lost. And my friends, that is you and me. So I'm going to ask this series of questions, and I want you to help me with this. Who is able to right every wrong, to wipe away every tear, and to heal every hurt? And the big idea of the message today, if you want to write this down, is God is able, and that's reason to celebrate. God is able, and that's reason to celebrate. Can we all just say that together? God is able, and that's reason to celebrate. Now, that statement might not be perfect grammar. It's not a complete sentence, and it may not even make total sense to you right now, but it will. I promise you that. The structure of the sermon today is a little different. If you've been here for a while, you know that I like a certain structure in a message, and this is going to feel a little bit off balance, and so I'm just going to tell you where we're going. We're looking at this book of Nahum, which is a book of history that was prophesied before it happened, and it's written in the form of ancient Hebrew poetry. Now, a little bit of that is lost in the English translation, so it's not going to feel like Shakespeare or anything like that. But I want you to know that that's the way that the book was written. And so the sermon's going to take a little bit of a different structure, and I just want to let you know where we're going so that you don't feel off balance. Number 1 is going to be this summary of Nahum, where we will see our big idea of the sermon drawn out from there. Number 2 is going to be an illustration of our big idea. And number 3 is going to be an application of our big idea. And so as we jump right into it, number 1, we are going to call this a desperate people. A desperate people. So Nahum, roughly speaking, was written about 100 years after Jonah and about 50 years after Micah that we talked about last week. And as I mentioned, it is a collection of poems that are announcing the downfall of the enemies of God, specifically Nineveh, the capital city of Assyria. Now I want to ask you, because there is a test once in a while, why does that name sound familiar, that name Nineveh? Why does that sound so familiar to us? Yeah, because that's where we started this whole series in the Minor Prophets, right? What we do know is that the people of Nineveh returned to their ruthless and evil treatment of others. They destroyed the temple. They destroyed the kingdom of Israel. They exiled God's people away from their homeland, and they forced them into slavery. They were more violent and more destructive than the world had ever seen at that time. And everybody was just watching and waiting for their downfall, which happened in the year of 612 BC when the Babylonians conquered them. But this book of Nahum, it begins with this all-powerful appearance of God's glory, where God confronts evil and he announces his judgment. So I'll begin in Nahum chapter 1 and beginning in verse 2. The Lord is a jealous and avenging God. I want you to imagine that you're on the receiving end of these words. Just kind of put yourself there for a moment. The Lord is a jealous and avenging God. The Lord is avenging and wrathful. The Lord takes vengeance on his adversaries and keeps wrath for his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power. And the Lord will by no means clear the guilty. His way is in whirlwind and storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet. He rebukes the sea and makes it dry. He dries up all the rivers. Bashan and Carmel wither. The bloom of Lebanon withers. The mountains quake before him, the hills melt, the earth heaves before him, the world and all who dwell in it. Who can stand before his indignation? Who can endure the heat of his anger? His wrath is poured out like fire, and the rocks are broken into pieces by him. If you can put yourself there now on the, not the receiving end of those words, but being God's people that are living in exile that have been so abused, you are a beaten people. You are a broken people, and you have been beaten and broken by the Assyrians, and now God is standing up and he's saying enough. God says enough. And then God makes you these promises. And more than just defeating your enemies, God promises refuge to those that have remained faithful to him. So I'll ask you again, is it okay for you to cheer the downfall of your enemies? Yeah, it is. Listen to Nahum announce their downfall, and he calls it good news. Good news. That sounds familiar too, doesn't it? It becomes an example of how God is at work within every generation, because God will not allow evil to endure forever. Now we're in verse 15 of chapter 1. Behold upon the mountains the feet of him who brings good news, who publishes peace. Keep your feasts, O Judah. Fulfill your vows. All of those things that you haven't been able to do for so long, you're going to be able to do them. For never again shall the worthless pass through you. He is utterly cut off. It is good news that those who have done so much harm are being dealt with by God, and that they will never hurt you again. And here's a promise that God makes in chapter 2 and verse 2. For the Lord is restoring the majesty of Jacob and the majesty of Israel. For plunderers have plundered them and ruined their branches. Evil has left its mark on you, but evil will not win. The Lord brings restoration. And he's specifically referring to God's people living as exiles in Assyria. But boy, oh boy, oh boy, it sure sounds a lot like what God does for us today, doesn't it? We are stained and corrupted by sin, but sin does not win. The Lord covers those who are faithful to him by his blood. And there's no more guilt, no more shame, no more penalty of sin. Here's one final announcement that God makes about his coming justice in chapter 3, verses 18 and 19. Your shepherds are asleep, O king of Assyria. Your nobles slumber. Your people are scattered on the mountains with none to gather them. There is no easing your hurt. Your wound is grievous. All who hear the news about you, what do? They clap their hands. All who hear the news about your downfall clap their hands over you, for upon whom has not come your unceasing evil. Your days of causing others to suffer are done, and God's people celebrate. Why? Because you can't hurt them anymore. God's judgment against evil is good news for those who have remained faithful to him. And maybe you have felt pain. Maybe you felt more than your share of pain. Maybe your pain has come because it's been caused by others. Maybe you have felt pain that it was caused by Satan and the demonic world around us. They walk back and forth like a lion on the prowl, stalking their prey. They wish to devour all that call Jesus Lord. And the Bible describes their attempts with words like trap, snare, scheme, lies, fiery arrows. And if we're honest, we have all fallen victim on some level. And many of us still bear the scars from that battle. So who is able to bring justice on behalf of someone who has been so hurt by others? God is able. And that is reason to celebrate. Number 2, a desperate child. I think it could also be a desperate father, and you'll see. Because we're going to turn to a story of Jesus to illustrate our point today, our point that God is able. And there are many to choose from, but this one story is especially meaningful to me. So Peter, James, and John have just come from the Mount of Transfiguration, where they got to see a glimpse of the glory of Jesus. They got to hear the voice of the Father saying, "This is my Son," and listen to him, okay? So they got to experience incredible things up on this mountain, and they come down off the mountain, and it is this roller coaster ride with mountaintops and valleys. And in Mark chapter 9, verses 14 through 29, we read this story. And when they came back off of the mountain, mountain, and they came to the other disciples. They saw a great crowd around them, and the scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, when they saw Jesus, they were greatly amazed, and they ran up to him, and they greeted him. And then Jesus asked them, "What are you arguing about with them?" And someone from the crowd answered Jesus. They said, "Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams, and he grinds his teeth, and he becomes rigid." A demon had possessed this young man with the goal of distorting and destroying the image of God that was within him. Because we are all created in the image of God. And Satan's goal is to distort that. And as we walk with Jesus Christ, that image becomes more and more visible. But Satan wants to do everything that he can to destroy it. So this man continues, this father, he said, "So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able." And Jesus answered them. I can imagine turning to those disciples, "Oh, faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you?" And then Jesus said, "Bring him to me." And they brought the boy to Jesus. And when the spirit saw Jesus, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground, and he rolled about foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood, and it has often cast him into fire and into water to destroy him." A desperate father. And then he looks at Jesus and he says, "But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." And Jesus said to him, "Excuse me?" Jesus said, I might have heard you wrong. I think you said, "If you can do anything, if you can." And then Jesus says these powerful words. And I say that a little sarcastically. I think Jesus said it with an incredible amount of grace. But Jesus goes on to say, "All things are possible for the one who believes." And immediately the father of the child cried out and he said, "I believe. Help my unbelief." And when Jesus saw that the crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him." And I love this, "Never enter him again." And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand, and he lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" And he said to them, "This kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer." I want you to hear this today, that belief leads to transformation. And this is very encouraging to me because we have family, we have grandkids that live far away. Janine, do you want to show them some pictures of the grandkids? She has pictures. I know you're surprised by that. If you want to see pictures, she's got pictures. But they live far away. They live in Maryland. And I'm so encouraged by this story because our belief and our prayers may bring God to move on their behalf, even though we're so far away. So don't let distance deter you from believing and praying for those that you love. I've told this story before, so I'll abbreviate it this time. But when we first moved here about 10 years ago, I was separated by Janine and Celine for about 6 months while we were selling our house up north. So I fully understand what you're going through there. And while I was here, I'd been here for about 6 months, and Janine gave me a phone call, and she said, Celine was very, very sick, and she was in the hospital, and they were running a bunch of tests, and that they had actually said that it was possibly cancer. And so I immediately talked to Phil and the elders, and they flew me home. And the next day, Celine was home. She was fine. She had no positive tests for anything. So maybe their tests were wrong. Maybe they messed it all up. I don't know. But maybe God miraculously intervened and healed her. Either way, my gratitude to God is exactly the same because Celine is okay. I can clearly remember the time that went by. What a long airplane trip that was, where I was scared, I was worried, I was helpless. There was nothing that I could do for her. And I want to ask you to put yourself in the place of the parent in this story that had tried everything and nothing worked, and he was helpless to help his little boy. Every day he watched his boy tormented and attacked and physically abused, thrown into fire and water trying to destroy him. He was possessed by an evil spirit until he brought the boy to Jesus. And then even with his imperfect faith opened a door to a miracle. Jesus said, "Come out and never enter him again. Young man, they will never hurt you again." Maybe there's someone here today that's in need of healing. Maybe it's physical, maybe it's spiritual. Maybe you're wrestling with belief. You can ask God to help you to believe better. So I'll ask you, who is able to defy all of the rules in order to bring a miraculous healing to us? God is able. And guess what? That's reason to celebrate. Number 3 is a desperate sinner, and I'll give you the bottom line here. That's you and me. We're the desperate sinner in this story. But as we move to application, I want to give you a couple of reminders from last week. Both heaven and hell are very real places. Jesus spoke of them as real places, and if we trust in the word of Jesus, we will treat them as such. And everyone will spend eternity in one of those two places because we are all sinners deserving eternal hell. And it is important that when we talk about salvation, that we understand what it is that we are being saved from. Do you remember that from last week? Does that sound a little bit familiar? Hell is a terrible and terrifying place. But did you know this? Hell is a place that was intended for Satan and his demons. Jesus was teaching one day, and he gave a picture of the day of his return. He was talking about the master that was returning, and he was rewarding some because they had been taking care of the hungry and the sick and the lonely and those that were in prison. And Jesus said this in Matthew 25:41. Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels." You see, those who refuse God's offer of salvation will suffer the same penalty as those who rebelled against him in heaven. And since God is eternal and God is infinite, the punishment for rejecting him is also eternal and infinite. Hell is where God's justice against sin is carried out, especially the worst sin of all, which is rejecting him. But I've got some good news. You're ready for some good news after that, right? The choice is yours. The choice is yours. Jesus came here, an infinite God in human form, so that he could dwell among us, so that he could pay for our sins, the penalty that we owe, the penalty that we could never pay. And he died on the cross, which was an infinite sacrifice and satisfied God's justice. And he rose on the third day, proving that everything that he said was true. And you can choose to either accept or to reject his sacrifice. And I believe that the reason that so many people reject him today is because they don't recognize that they are desperate sinners like you and me. I love Acts chapter 2. Jesus has been crucified. He is raised from the dead. He is ascended back into heaven. And then the first message, the first sermon preached after that ascension of Jesus is Peter standing on the crowded streets of Jerusalem and telling everybody that God sent Jesus and Jesus was here to lead us back to God. And then you killed him. Like, you're responsible for the death of Jesus. And the Bible says that they were cut to the heart. I love that phrase. It gets me every time. They were cut to the heart. And I believe that that is what so many are missing today. We skip over our sinfulness. We skip over our responsibility in sending Jesus to the cross. We miss being cut to the heart. We miss that we are desperate sinners and we are helpless to do anything about it. We are desperate. But desperate is a really good place to be when it drives you to Jesus. So instead of casually going through religious motions, we recognize that we are desperate sinners in need of a Savior. We accept his gift of salvation with deep gratitude because we have been cut to the heart. And Satan, demons, our spiritual enemies, are bound for eternal hell, the place that was prepared for them, while we look forward to a place where there is no more tears, there are no more pain, no more sorrow, a beautiful place prepared for us by Jesus himself. And there we will dwell in his presence forever. And if you haven't seen yourself as a desperate sinner, I pray that you will open your eyes and open your heart and do it today. And I don't call you that because I want to beat you up. I call you that because I want you to experience real healing and real peace that only begins when you recognize your desperate situation. So who is able to free us from all temptation, all guilt, and all shame? God is able. And that is reason to celebrate. As we were looking at the songs that were chosen for this morning's worship, Scott said to me, he said, there's a lot of grace in the worship today. And I said, that's a good thing because there ain't none of it in the sermon today. And that's not entirely true. Some of the things, as we look at this book of Nahum and we look at God's justice and God's judgment, it can seem so harsh. But the truth is that because of God's judgment, we learn what grace really means. And that's how we experience grace. God is able, my friends, and that's reason to celebrate. It was reason for the people that Nahum wrote his book to. It was reason for that desperate dad and his son who had suffered for so long. And it's reason for you and me today. So maybe you haven't celebrated in quite a while. You can have every reason to celebrate today. The next step that I want to encourage you with is simply this. Humble yourself before God's justice. It is his justice that leads us to his grace. Trust that he will put an end to all oppression. That is not a promise of health, wealth, and prosperity in the world and in this lifetime. God may bring you a freedom from your oppression in this life, but it may be when we step out of this life and into eternity. That's in God's hands, and we trust him. But also celebrate. Celebrate that they will never hurt you again. Because God is in control, and we love him, and we trust him.